Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the City Till We Die podcast, episode number 2. Thank you for all the positive feedback on episode 1. Hopefully, there's plenty more of these to come, and it's not going to be a short-lived podcast. Battling draw for Norwich City at the weekend. A lot's been made of it. There's plenty to dissect over the course of the next 45 minutes or so. We'll sort of be following the similar format as we did in the last show. We'll kind of have a little bit of a reflection on Saturday, have a little bit of a delve into a talking point, and then start to preview the next game, Saturday, Carrow Road against Wrexham, Hollywood, come to town. Ben, I suppose, how's your weekend been since we last recorded?
Wow, that's a great question. Yeah, it's good. I think initially after the game I was quite positive, and I know a few days have passed, but I'm not feeling as great. The weekend itself, wonderful. It's just a shame that in the 95th minute of that game of just an absolute slog from Norwich City, they had to concede. But no, beyond that, very, very well.
Yeah, you mentioned Coventry away game. There's plenty of stats that we can obviously delve into. The XG maybe didn't make for the most prettiest of reading. I certainly, spent the whole 90 minutes pretty much, fearing the worst that Norwich were going to get pretty smacked up, I think. At one point I thought it could have been a cricket score, the way that Coventry were attacking. Norwich, managed to hold themselves firm over the course of the 90 up until that last minute goal that you mentioned to I suppose give away 2 points, but probably over the course a point well gained, I think, that most fans would have taken before the game. An XG just over 4, 34% possession. I think Norwich's pass completion rate was pretty poor relative to some of their other games so far this season. I mean, the performance we can delve into. What did you make of it? Because I think a lot's been made of it on social media, and we spoke maybe about kind of the heightened emotions you can get on social media. But I think some of it's been quite fair, that the judgment of that performance as a whole.
Yeah, it's a tough one because there's one thing, there's one point that I think will remain true, which is regardless of how Norwich City's season now goes, regardless of where they finish in the table, that will be viewed as a very impressive point. The performance in isolation was, as you said, almost difficult at times to watch. The way I would describe it and the way I sort of feel about it is that when you're playing away from home against a team who are tipped to beat you because of how they're playing and the sort of the context that surrounds them, you expect 15 minutes of just sort of being under the cosh. And the classic football phrase is riding the storm, isn't it? And weathering it and seeing if you can get out of it better. And I don't know, it felt like the whole game was that. Um, what was it? The 20th, 25th minute, even after Norwich's goal, I'm sort of sat there like, is this going to stop at any point? Are Norwich going to be able to get a foothold? And I appreciate the goal, a great finish. We'll obviously talk about it, but it's hard to not be at least a little bit disappointed in terms of just watching Norwich get battered, because they did get battered. And it has bred this wonderful performance sort of between Vlad, Darling, and Medic, like as a three. Absolutely magnificent. But I'm always someone who tries to look at the bigger picture, and you can call it wishy-washy, you can call it sort of doom and gloom, but that's kind of just the way I'm coded. I'm really impressed they walked away with a point, or limped away with a point, I should say. Um, yeah, the bigger implications of it we'll talk about, but it's a weird feeling. It's a really weird feeling because I've had so many conversations with different people about it, and each time I speak to someone else, my mind almost changes in the sense of 1 minute I'm like, it's a great point, it's something for Norwich to build on, it's this opportunity to actually go, hang on, we need to change here whilst picking up a point along the way. But also that pessimistic, sort of almost scared side of me is sort of saying, oh, that didn't look the healthiest, it didn't look the cleanest of performances. But yeah, I don't know. It's a tricky one, and as we discuss in a little bit more detail, I'm sure our feelings will become clear.
Yeah, 7 points now from 9 on the road in the Championship, which feels like a really positive start. But there's been spells maybe within the first couple of games on the road. Certainly at Portsmouth, I felt first half they sort of asserted their dominance. Blackburn, they had spells where they were really good. Saturday was probably the first time where I felt it really wasn't a sustainable performance over the course of a 90 minutes away from home, typically, where most other days you get beaten quite comfortably. It's a great point, and one that, as you sort of said in context, if I think maybe Norwich could go get 3 points at home on Saturday, everyone's looking at going, what a great point that is, irrespective of the performance. And certainly further down the line, maybe later in the season, if we sort of look back at that being a really key point, irrespective of performance. But the lack of composure on the ball, the problems they had at different points in terms of the crosses. Vlad, as you mentioned, having to be at sort of the top of his level. Medic, I thought that was one of his better games, if not his best game so far. Darlin, apart from the mistake at the latter stages, was Colossus again at the back. But I suppose to sort of bring it to the full circle, let's go from the start of the game. I mean, Norwich, as you sort of mentioned, a little bit slow at the traps, and Coventry, as maybe expected, with that full crowd behind them, sort of, and a team that, as we mentioned on the sort of last podcast, the top goal scorers in the league, and I think that was maybe expected that Norwich were going to have to ride it out. But that finish from Kvistgaarden, as good as you're going to see really in the Championship, just to find the corner, and I guess for his confidence as well, it is a huge moment. Maybe and then you got the injury, which we'll dissect a little bit more as we move through the podcast.
Yeah, I think it was nice to see him score that goal because, we'll talk about the game, but individually, the guy is, for me, the marquee signing. We spoke about it in the last pod in terms of he is someone who, beyond Sargent, which is the marquee piece of business, beyond Sargent, he's got to be someone who provides goals. And that goal specifically, in terms of this idea of being hopeful, gives me a lot of hope because it was a really clever touch. It was a really clever finish. It was nice for Medic as well to see his ability to bring the ball forward and cut through the lines. I really enjoyed that finish, and it did give me flashbacks of Timu Puki and just, I don't want to say dragging because dragging makes it sound like a fluke, but you know what I mean, just sort of cutting it across goal where actually it's not the power that gets it in, it's the precision, it's the focus that he's put into putting the ball into a very specific part of the goal, and it was an absolute joy to watch. And he so far has shown flashes of being a really clever footballer, and that finish really supports this idea that actually Norwich do have a player who perhaps can provide the goals that they desperately need when Sargent isn't firing. And in this game, Sargent was completely isolated. And guess what? That's going to happen again this season. The guy has now, for as much as we love him, he's basically put a target on his back to say, look, can you stop me? And it's the 10 other players around him, providing Sargent stays fit, it's the 10 other players around him who are going to have to step up in their respective roles and deliver the goods. And Kvistgaarden's done that with a goal. So yeah, I was really pleased with that element. It's just, I kind of wish that was the turning point in the game where Norwich could get a foothold in it, and the players that hadn't started the game so well, and the players I'm looking at there are Sienats and Diallo, and providing that wide option for Norwich to almost relieve the pressure. I was hoping at that point in the game they could almost turn the tide and say, look, actually, we're going to bring the game back to you. But that wasn't the case, and we saw the performance that we saw.
Indeed, yeah. I thought Fisher had a really difficult first half there. Plenty of times Mason Clark managed to get the better of him. I think it was over 30 crosses into the Norwich box over the course of the 90, which was a clear sort of problem that Norwich faced throughout the whole duration, really, of the 90, albeit second half. I think they got a little bit more of a grip of it. The injuries are a little bit more of a sort of negative light, I suppose, on that game. Crescenti, I thought, has certainly stepped up over the course of the sort of early part of this season. Then, we mentioned the injury as well to Kvistgaarden as well, which is not ideal. I guess the time wasting element as well is an interesting one. A couple of bookings in the first half, which I know the Coventry fans haven't been best pleased around it. Seen quite a lot of stick on social media. Saw a few people after on the walk back to the car after the game who were personally given us a few comments about our sort of performance as a team, and maybe it being a little bit of a surprise. I think plenty of them have seen Norwich teams down the years that naturally go to sort of the CBS and be a little bit more attacking and try and win the game. And maybe this was the first time they'd seen a different sort of evolution, I guess, of a Norwich team. But I guess what do you sort of make of that? Because we mentioned Liam Manning's tactics and maybe his approach, but did Coventry have it, I guess, a little bit too easy? Did Norwich sit off too much, or was it Norwich being poor, or I guess sort of the approach? I mean, what do you make of it? Because clearly there's sort of that debate, I guess, on social media at the moment around the sort of competition, I guess, in different places in the team as well. So yeah, where do you maybe sit on the fence in terms of that?
Well, and this is something I feel like we're going to do quite a lot. I want to compare it to last season. It almost feels like we've got the reverse problem where everything is almost peachy and everything is sunshine and roses in the attacking third of the pitch, and at the back, a complete mess. It almost feels like it's the other way around now. And I don't want to, obviously, with Sargent firing on all fronts, I don't want to sort of criticise him that way, but it feels as if, and it's about that triangle. It's Vlad, it's Medic, it's Darling, especially after Coventry. It feels like they're very solid, and it's what's in front of them that is almost causing the problems that arise at times. and has arise during games and basically for the whole of the Coventry match. And I think Manning wants to take the approach of being comfortable off the ball. It's one thing that Thorpe always used to speak about, wasn't it? In terms of, I remember when we beat like Hull, it was like 4 or 5-1 or 5-0 or whatever it was. We had a few of those performances where we just dominated and we scored loads of goals, but we were cut through too many times. And he would talk about the way we want to defend is on the front foot. I think Manning wants his team to look comfortable off the ball. That really is such a shift in mentality, and I appreciate the personnel has also changed, but that is going to take time. It's teething issues, and I don't have that much of a problem with that approach. I like the idea that I can watch Norwich City who look comfortable without the ball. Obviously, we always want our team to be on the ball and scoring goals, but it's a realistic approach, and it's probably the more pragmatic thing that Ben Napper spoke about when Manning was appointed. And I just think they got it wrong in the sense of players weren't doing their jobs properly. I don't look at Liam Manning there and think, oh, your system's completely wrong. Oh, you've got to change this, you've got to change that. I just look at players who need to be a little bit braver on the ball. That does spiral back to the head coach and the confidence he installs in players. But again, we're 5 games into the season, aren't we? So I don't really have a problem with the way we set up. I just think, for example, Sienat's on the right hand side not pulling his weight led to Kellen Fisher getting overrun, which led to 37 crosses. I'm not saying they're all on Fisher's side, but there was a point where, and to be honest with you, it's been a theme watching Norwich, it feels like my whole life, where a player will get into a position. In my head, I'm thinking, stop the cross doesn't get stopped. And luckily, we had Cambridge's answer to Maldini, didn't we, playing at the back. And yeah, I don't have a problem with the approach. I think one thing you can take for granted in the Championship, a league where they tell you not to take things for granted, is you will concede chances. Coventry had all this possession, had all these shots, and had this amazing XG, but yet we still feel like we could have scored 2 or 3 goals from the chances, especially later in the game. You will concede chances. It's just about managing that and how you respond. Saturday, not looking too far forward, but Saturday provides the opportunity to once again be good defensively. But how, especially at home, how do you then turn that into almost balancing the game and then tipping the scales in your favour? So to answer your question, I don't have a problem with the approach. I feel a bit for the fullbacks in terms of how they got overran. I like to think that Antti Sienats will, whether he starts or not on Saturday, I'm not too sure. But for example, I feel a bit harsh picking him out. But I like to think that he'll look at that performance and think, actually, yeah, hang on a minute. It's not all about me just getting forward. I need to go and help Fisher out a little bit. And that kind of mentality will support the rest of the outfield players and standing in front of the defence. So I don't really have a problem with it. It's just yeah, it's a tough one, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I think Coventry certainly looked like a team further down that journey, under Frank Lampard being there a little bit of time, a group of players that have been sort of assembled now together over the course of a couple of years. Norwich still, teething issues, I guess, early days for Liam Manning with a group of players that some of them are new to the Championship and sort of getting used to each other and those patterns of play. And I think sometimes it's very easy to overcomplicate things and maybe try and play a certain way straight away and hope that it works. Sometimes you kind of got to add different elements at different points. And I think that's maybe what Liam Manning is trying to do at the moment. And ultimately, they are grinding out results and getting some points on the board. And I think, hypothetically, if they can get some more points in the next couple of games, fans have got to look at that as a relatively positive start heading into some sort of big games, I guess, around the corner and fairly shortly, which, at some point down the line we'll preview. Let's talk a little bit maybe around some of the key talking points, I guess, from the game, that maybe the passive nature on the ball, the concept maybe of, I guess, Norwich maybe not having that comfort, being out of possession that they have done in certain other games. I mean, has it gone too far? I suppose down that path maybe.
Yeah, for me, it's a quality thing though. It's players who are getting used to the division in Topic. I think Topic, we mentioned him last week, didn't we? In terms of he is clearly a very good footballer. He is someone that we have been crying out for, but actually his performances really reflect someone who is just getting used to the league. I really don't think he was helped, specifically in the first 15 minutes of the Coventry game, with the lack of movement around him. There's a couple of times where he sort of dropped into the pivot and he almost just he had to play the ball to the side or back. In my head, where we've seen him at his best in the very small sample size that we've got is when he drives forward and he can almost pick that pass out, and only done it a couple of times, but you can clearly see, and we saw it in the compilations, didn't we, where he's almost desperate to just gallop forward with the ball and progress Norwich. But for me, it's down to individuals, and it's why I think it's important. And to be honest with you, I think Norwich City and fans they're in the same boat in terms of Saturday not necessarily being Manning's fault. One point I do want to make actually on that is I do believe that the fact we drew that game will actually help the players, but also the fans and everyone around that game understand it a little bit better and take what they need to take from it. If you win that game, not that it's a bad thing, I'm not saying it's a good thing we didn't win, but it almost becomes a little bit more difficult to make the points we're making in terms of trying to sort of see both sides, because the argument then becomes, well, it's a results business and we won. But it almost does help, and this is me being desperately positive, it almost does help the case that we drew the game and we can maybe pick out the intricacies and the factors that need to be tweaked a bit. And for me, it's quality, and I'm more than willing to be as patient as I possibly can be.
Yeah, I'm intrigued to see whether Pella Matson maybe gets a little bit more of a run out in that Wrexham game. You know, someone that they brought in who's clearly been identified over the course of the whole summer and sort of all the work they do behind the scenes, scouting these players for a couple of years now, as a player that can maybe fit this system and what they want from a midfielder. And you kind of look at those early performances this season, and sort of, I think the most kind of control they've had in games has actually been when, you know, man, they sold to Ipswich Town was in the team, and maybe just having that midfielder who can sort of impose himself but just regain that control in key moments could be key, I suppose, moving into some of these other games quickly round the corner. You sort of mentioned Sienats and maybe his performance, and you know, we sort of saw the struggles in the first half, I think, with Callum Fisher maybe not being backed up by Sienats and maybe being doubled up on almost at different points, and that led to all the crosses and the problems that Norwich had. But I think you actually wrote it in sort of the pre-notes that we had ahead of this show, and I certainly felt this leaving the ground the other day, that I still think that they're lacking sort of width, proper natural wingers who are more ball carriers. You know, you look at Diallo maybe on one side, who's got that sort of raw pace and that ability to drive Norwich up the pitch, which I think maybe seeing that last season we saw flashes of that, but maybe not so much from a sort of wider position. I think he sort of isn't a conventional winger, so maybe struggles a little bit more with that. So I guess should Norwich have maybe addressed that or looked at that area in the last summer window that's just gone, or is that maybe an area moving into the summer? I know Jurasek as well is kind of in the building, who you could say is a natural winger, but we've not seen much of him yet to sort of make that firm judgment.
Yeah, he makes the conversation tricky, doesn't he, Jurasek? Because I do think Norwich are like that. In my mind, I almost act as if when I speak, I almost think that he doesn't exist, and that feels harsh to say. But we spent 6 odd million quid on this player, and it's almost like he doesn't exist. So it makes that conversation quite tricky. Of actually, I do think Norwich are light in that area, quality wise, proven quality wise. Proven quality is such a difficult phrase for the Championship, because you can bring in someone who's won 3 Championship titles in a row, they can still have a stinker the season you sign them. Um, it is almost, it's tricky because the window's shut and it's covering old ground. But you've got Diallo, you've got Jurasek. I like this idea that actually you can have a balanced width, if that makes sense. So you've got that out and out winger who stretches the game, but on the right hand side you've got Sienats, or I'd quite like to see Kvistgaarden in there, because I think he's got the because he's not going to start up front because that's going to be Sargent. I think he's got the footballing intelligence very clearly to make use of this whole inside forward thing. But it's tricky because this Norwich City team under Manning is meant to be. I feel like the dream we were sold is that it's quite versatile, and it feels like we can't be unless Jurasek is involved, and he is sort of that out and out wide player. The only real time we've seen him, of course, is Southampton at home, and again there were glimpses of decent touches, but when I watched that game, to really go, a few weeks back now, I really hoped he'd just get the ball and just bolt down the line, but that doesn't quite seem to be the style. Um, Man, it pains me to say this, but I miss the profile of Onel Hernandez. The directness, the pace, well, not the end product, but I just miss having that option where you're bringing someone on who will, and he feels like an exception really to the wingers we've had, where they do just consistently drive with pace. You had Signs who would drive at players, but I don't think he was particularly quick. He's not someone you bring on in the last minute of a game to just run at defenders. It would have been nice to have that. Diallo very clearly isn't that. I still like Diallo. I really think he's got a lot of potential. Um, he clearly likes to have the ball, but almost in the back of my mind when watching him, I'm wondering whether he's being told to just find the pass before doing anything else, which I mean, we'll see how that unfolds for his career at Norwich City. But yeah, maybe they should have, maybe they shouldn't have. I know there was talk that Norwich would be looking at sort of that young Premier League loan that you sort of typically see. The most recent example being Cade Gordon, not so much my cup of tea. A man I do kind of wish we'd signed again is Lewis Dobbin. I think he really came into his own towards the end of his Norwich City career. I know it was cut short with a sort of well, quite a significant injury, really. But and not to dwell too much on the past, he almost had that profile of someone who could drive at someone. Again, not necessarily that lightning fast pace that Hernandez had, but you saw towards the end of his time with us that he would cut inside and have that shot. And he scored what, a goal or two, and he's been doing it for Preston. Like his goal on, I think he scored 2 in 2 now for Preston over the last 2 matches, and his last goal for them was just a prime example of carry the ball. And I know it's not going to fly into the top corner every time, but it's almost nice to have that, isn't it? So yeah, that's how I feel about that. It's tricky, isn't it? Because you're looking back at a window that's passed and everyone's kind of moved on. But please, the last thing I want to say before I finish my point is that Norwich City have an abundance of quality in their squad. They have a lot of talented players. As fans, I look at that squad and I'm excited by it. It's just we just need to see it batter someone, essentially.
Yeah, hopefully that'll be Saturday afternoon. Moving from maybe the attacking elements to kind of the defensive elements, we've spoken already a bit about maybe individual errors and sort of goals that Norwich have shipped, I guess, so far this season, which sort of over the piece have been quite frustrating because they can be quite key moments within games. Certainly, look back at that Borough game and they almost killed themselves in that sort of 5 minutes in the first half, and they were only a couple of minutes, 4 minutes away from sort of getting a big 3 points at the CBS, albeit we've already added the context of maybe not deserving it, but that would have been a huge 3 points. But Harry Darling, who I thought was immense again on Saturday, you sort of referenced him to Maldini, and I would probably agree with that. I think it was six blocks, 10 clearances, a proper old school defender who just seems to get his head on everything, clears everything, but also comfortable on the ball. But in that moment, sort of, I suppose, tired minds and all the effort he's had to put in over the course of the 90, which maybe is kind of, I suppose, result maybe of Norwich's sort of sitting back and inviting pressure, that mistake that he's gifted away. It is becoming a little bit of a common theme, and we've seen it in recent years as well. So, I mean, how do Norwich, I suppose, go about addressing that? Will that be something that comes with time when these players maybe sort of get used to each other? Is it going to be more when the system maybe starts to click and they get all that balance right, and there's going to be maybe less pressure on that defence over the course of the 90? How do they resolve it? I guess, Ben, Liam Manning's paid to do this, not us, but I'm going to ask you to do it.
Well, as fans, we're entitled to do so, aren't we? And it's much easier for us because there's, we don't get sacked for it. I think it's a tricky one, isn't it? I genuinely believe, and I'm all for in-depth tactical analysis. I love it. I read it. I enjoy it. There are times where, absolutely no idea what some of it means. But for me, it's time. It is as simple as these players getting used to each other. Again, to reference Coventry game, that Darling error at the back, he is the only player on the pitch for that game that could have made that mistake and not have an entire fan base jump on his back because of what a colossus he was, which one speaks to his character and the way he played. But I like to think that that example of him just clearly being so tired, I like to think that the players will see that and almost something will twig in their brain, whether it's conscious, subconscious, whatever it is, and just make them want to dig in a little bit more. He was phenomenal. I just think it is time though. Um, Saturday, you've got a team who are the only team in the league, which when I read it, courtesy of the lovely Connor Southwell telling me, the only team with the worst expected goals against means, I mean, it means the game's going to finish 0-0, but it's quite exciting that we will clearly get chances in this game. And I want to leave Carrow Road feeling like I have seen a well constructed side create chances. We've seen flashes of it. The more I think about the opening spells that Manning has referenced against Borough, against Millwall, in the first half against Blackburn as well, I believe it's there. It just, again, football really is a confidence game. it just needs to sort of show its head, and just stay there. Do you know what I mean? Like it's so tricky to. I'm trying to sound a little bit like I know what I'm talking about. It's just time and patience, and I truly believe Saturday will be a good example of watching Norwich City at their best. And I mean, if it's not, then I think alarm bells will begin to chime ever so slightly.
Yeah, I guess before we maybe talk a little bit more about Saturday's game and how that will look, there was a few positives I think coming out of that Coventry game. As much as we maybe dissected some of the problems they had, and sort of some of the issues and the way they sat so deep and invited a lot of pressure, there was some positives. Kvistgaarden getting off the mark with a goal. We sort of said about him and maybe that boost of confidence it would have given him. And hopefully the injury's not so bad when we get the update. What will be tomorrow now from Liam Manning, Kraseni as well. Obviously the injury there. Hopefully that's not so bad. But I thought Jovan Makama, I thought he was very good when he came on. Medic, that was definitely his best game, I think, in a Norwich shirt so far. I guess what sort of boost will that give those individuals and maybe some of those that are on the fringes like the Makamas who maybe will be pushing for a start going into Saturday's game?
Yeah, there's two elements, isn't there? You've got the player themselves and sort of the psychology behind being having confidence to know you can come on and make a difference. Makama really just a great example of someone coming on and clearly doing their job. Towards the end, Norwich definitely could have nicked it, and it's bizarre to say, but I feel almost a little bit hard done by that they didn't, because there was two, and I don't want to call them big chances because they weren't that big, but there were two times where Makama had the ball out wide, and you just think, get it in the box, get it in the box. But who do you want on the end of that cross? Him with his massive head, standing at 6'4". And the other element is it will boost the atmosphere, home or away, in terms of, again, to use Makama as an example, if Carrow Road in the 75th minute, if we're drawing 1-1 against Wrexham and we aren't playing too badly, but we need that dynamic option. And we see Makama coming off, knowing that actually he can make a difference. It will make a positive impact on the atmosphere, and that is so important, because no matter what, I'm pretty sure most footballers will tell you, the fans are legitimately are very important, and that atmosphere will really drive them on. It's so important to have that element, and Makama, as an example, again brings that. And it's a really bizarre. Just to touch on him as a person in general, it's just really bizarre, isn't it? Because he's massive, and I'm trying to think of who to compare it to. Almost Steeperman like, where he has that delicate touch. And I mean, where their games differ is that he's very powerful, very quick. I want to see him get a goal, desperate to, and not just that, but I feel like one is coming. Um, yeah, it's good, isn't it, to have that element. And I mean, the title of the video is "Where are Norwich City going wrong?" And when things aren't going their way, being able to turn the tide is something they can't do, and that is where things are going quite wrong at the moment. Not to make it sound more dramatic than what it is, but yeah, Makama and whoever else you want to bring off the bench is a good example. I feel bad for the lad, but I don't feel particularly enthralled when I see Oscar Schwartau coming off the bench. I don't quite know what he is. I'm not sure he knows what he is, in terms of a footballing profile. Um, but it works both ways, doesn't it? You've got a Carrow Road. We'll use Wrexham as an example. If Carrow Road sees at 1-1 in the 75th minute Makama coming on, the reaction is going to be very different to Oscar Schwartau, and that's something that boils down to Liam Manning and how he manages that. And I know you've got the whole ignore the noise stuff, but yeah, it presents an interesting problem.
Yeah, I think the biggest credit I can play Joe Van Makama is he definitely sort of made an impact, I think, for both sets of supporters. I was sort of walking alongside the canal back towards the car, and these couple of Coventry fans were talking to us, being like, who's the big lad who came on for you guys towards the end? He really sort of, I suppose, struck fear a little bit into their minds, because he is a little bit different, very good technically, but also, sort of that physical presence, that power, that sort of directness that Norwich can also play when they've got him, even more so than maybe a Josh Sargent up top. So he does offer something different. And I think within games where maybe Norwich are trying to see a game out, but also even if they're chasing games and they're trying to get a goal, he almost fits both of those, because he can go and hold the ball in the corner if you're trying to see a game out, or he can throw himself in the mixer when you're sort of trying to put a long throw in or a late corner, and put real make a bit of a difficult situation, I guess, for some of those defenders. So yeah, I think
Can I,
over the
can I just butt in and say, I think he's a really interesting, and I'm only butting in because his point will leave my mind forever. He's a really great example of how football as a game has evolved, especially in the Championship, in terms of two players, right? Jovan Makama, and I can't say his first name, but I had to just Google his name to make sure. Do you remember Newhugh from Sheffield
Yeah,
Wednesday?
yeah,
That
yeah.
absolute unit. You've got those two together who would come on at similar times in the game, but two very different footballers. You had Nuhu, which was get the ball on his head at all costs. And I remember, I think it must have been against Ipswich, just watching him rattle in an equaliser. And that, as a Norwich City fan, the couple of times that you watched him come off the bench, you think, oh my God, they're just going to pump balls into the box. It's almost deceptive with Makama in terms of, will Norwich pump the ball? I don't think they will, for what it's worth. I think they kind of tried it, didn't they, for Southampton? But I don't think they're going to pump the balls to him. I think they're going to play it into his feet and almost let him work his magic, which is just a clear sign of how football has gone in terms of trying to play football more. And the definition of trying to play football in this current period is it's on the floor, it's flair, it's passing, it's not, 20, well, not even 20, 10 years ago, it was very much how can we get the ball in the goal. But I just thought that was an interesting point. I really like Makama.
So do I. Hopefully, we see more of him on Saturday. And talking a little bit more, I guess, about Saturday and what's ahead now for Norwich City. It is Wrexham at home. I think it's the first time since the 80s that Norwich will have faced them. So it's been a while, not an opponent that either of us would have seen Norwich play before. So that's kind of exciting. And there's all the sort of natural links, I guess, to Hollywood and everything else that comes with it. But I guess 3 points at home has got to be key from this game, though, Ben, because so far you look at the away record, we've touched on it there, and sort of the positives of getting 7 points from 9 and beating some difficult places. Fratton Park, there's not going to be too many teams that go there and get 3 points. Even the CBS, I think most teams will come away from there if they get anything from that. Will be relatively happy. And Blackburn, on any given day can make it difficult at Ewood Park. So there's plenty of good stuff there to take. We spoke on the last podcast maybe about that home atmosphere and that sort of that's just a willingness maybe to try and see Norwich produce something, which hasn't quite happened yet against two teams that I think are very well settled. Wrexham are a completely different team, more of a recently assembled team, lots of players that have come in this summer. We'll speak more about some of those individuals in just a moment. But do you want to see, I guess, a performance, but maybe not get 3 points, or is it just purely about getting 3 points on Saturday and almost getting those home fans buying into things that this current team and maybe the issues we've outlined will sort of go out the window a little bit for a few hours, I guess, after the game?
It's both. I want to see both. I'd be very happy with 3 points, but the only situation where I'd still feel a little bit hesitant would be if it's like a 2-1 win and we go, that classic sort of, I'm trying to think who it was, like maybe like a Hoff performance where we score those 2 goals and then the goal gets pulled back and then you're just on edge for the rest of the game. If that happens, I might not be most pleased after the game. I'm sure at the end of the 90 I'll be ecstatic, but when I reflect, I might not be. It's two clubs who, when you look at them in terms of personnel and aspirations, I don't think they're too far apart from each other. It's a club who I think Wrexham have spent the most in the league, reportedly. But it's two clubs with a lot of new players. The difference between us and them is they've signed some what I call veterans, so like Connor Cody, Matty James, James McLean. Kiefer Moore is a dangerous one. Ryan Hardy, again, these are names that are well known in this division. You chuck Callum Doyle in there as well, in terms of being well known from a Norwich City perspective. And you've got a manager who clearly is good, but again is perhaps looking at the size of the job ahead of them and thinking, "Blimey, hang on a minute." Much like, and I don't think it's quite as drastic as that is the case with Liam Manning, but Liam Manning will be looking at this as, "Blimey, this is quite a big job." And it was almost like pitting two very similar teams against each other. How that will turn out, I'm not too sure. If you look at the stats for how Wrexham have performed, because I haven't sat and watched every Wrexham game, but if you look at the stats, they haven't been too bad. Much like Norwich, they tend to sort of concede possession, but they still get shots away. I think the irony to their most recent loss is it wasn't quite as drastic in terms of stats as the Norwich Coventry game, but they had way more possession, they had way more shots, the XG was higher. So they're going to be feeling pretty hard done by, especially after performing like that at home. I think they are going to be the difference. The main difference between them and Norwich is the goals and how they figure out what they want to achieve during the season. Whereas Norwich, we've kind of got this clear plan of playoffs, playoffs, playoffs. It'll be interesting to see how we fare against each other. I think we'll win for what it's worth, but I want to leave Carrow Road with that feeling of, yeah, I feel satisfied. And I mean, that over the years has come in many different shapes and sizes. I remember leaving, I think it was West Brom at home under Daniel Farker in his second season where we'd lost 4-3. I remember leaving thinking, blimey, that was quite entertaining. It was nice to see a Norwich City team like go for it and score goals. I'd like that feeling in my stomach, but I'd also like all 3 points. And it is almost the next step, isn't it, in this evolution of Liam Manning's Norwich City to win at home. And then maybe the next step after that is to win at home emphatically. But it's really important. It's not do or die. It's not the be all and end all of the season. I mean, look at Coventry last season, for example, where when Lampard took over, what were they, 17th, 18th, and then you win 3 games on the trot in the Championship, and all of a sudden you find yourself propelled up the table, don't you? So it's not do or die, but if you want Norwich City fans, and for as great as the away fans are, yourself included, of course, you need to get Carrow Road on side. So, in terms of morale at Carrow Road, not necessarily goals for the season, but it's a big game, and Norwich need to win it, and they need to leave people almost feeling full and satisfied rather than hungry for a little bit more. And again, if we have to use the word potential after Saturday, then I'm going to possibly slap my head against a brick wall. But we'll see. Yeah, I'm quite excited for it because again, it presents that opportunity, doesn't it, to win a game at home. And after the 2 games so far at home, or the 3 if you include that horrible cup game, we are due one.
We are indeed, yeah, against a team that, I think Phil Parkinson's under pressure a little bit at Wrexham. You mentioned sort of the spending, I guess, and all the success they've had over the course of sort of the last 3 or 4 years and the dramatic rise that's took them to the Championship. There is expectation on his shoulders, on the club's shoulders, to probably be in and around that promotion mix this year, and it hasn't quite gone to plan thus far for them. But one of the big marquee signings, I guess, for them, a player we both watched last season, Callum Doyle. You mentioned him in sort of the players they brought in. Usually sort of plays as part of a back three for them. I think we saw maybe his problems in terms of his pace last season and maybe that being exposed. I guess given that some of that sort of attacking unit will have worked with him last year, maybe be sort of, I guess, know his game and maybe how to exploit that. I mean, that potentially, I guess, could be a good avenue for Norwich moving into Saturday's game.
Yeah, for sure. And also he's got that emotional element to his game. He is very angry. He can get very angry, and the head can go. He picks up. I think he's already picked up 2 yellow cards in his 2 games for Wrexham so far. But he will pick up a yellow card. And as you say, the personnel that played alongside him, I hope, know that. And we mentioned, didn't we, the dark arts earlier? It's that side of the game where I like to think Norwich will have that intelligence to perhaps try and get at him from the off. And as a player, really liked him, but there were weaknesses, and we've almost seen it with like Yakov Medic as an example, where perhaps a player isn't suited to a back three. And I mean, it's nice to talk about a back three that isn't ours in terms of having a weakness, but as an individual, yeah, I'm not looking at him and thinking, right, that's the weak point. We should just go after him solely because we know he's a good player, and he's also very young, so he's got a lot of room for growth. Um, but it's a weird challenge because when you look at a newly promoted side, whatever division you're in, you're always tipped to go down, aren't you? Whereas their spending has been second to none, and they have that freedom, don't they? Because of the income they bring in with the whole Hollywood element. But they spent 10 million quid on Nathan Broadhead, a player we know very well from the derbies that he's played in. A quality player. That is no joke. That is no light touch. He is, once he gets firing for them, as well as like Kiefer Moore is another example. These are serious Championship players. They've not just signed um, a bunch of Connor Cody's, a bunch of has-beens. There is a lot of quality in there, which it really means we will have to be alert to the challenge. I can very much picture a scenario where Norwich go 1-0 down in the first sort of 10-15 minutes, and Carrow Road is almost like, whoa. But I don't think that's the be all and end all, because it's football is about improvising, it's about adapting, it's about overcoming what's in front of you. And I can very much picture a scenario, and we've seen it before, haven't we, where Carrow Road is almost a bit stunned and Norwich City go 1-0 down, and almost this new challenge of, well, how do you react to going 1-0 down so early after not having such a positive start? How do you react to that? And if that situation arises, I'd like to see Norwich dig their heels in. But yeah, Wrexham aren't a team to be taken lightly. And I do want to say as well, I I haven't watched the documentary. We have to talk about it. I haven't watched the documentary. I'm probably not going to watch the documentary, but I almost feel scared to say it. I like what they've done for football. I like that sort of almost, well, globally for sure. Globally, they have put another spotlight on football, and they've almost made it accessible to a group of people. Who that might be, not too sure, but there definitely is a group of people that wouldn't have been into football before. I like the idea that they're bringing that spotlight to to our footballing pyramid system, and not necessarily below the national league, but I like the idea that more people are watching our game at a lower level, because obviously they have to come from a when did they get taken over? Was it national, when they were in the national north or
Yes.
south or
Yeah.
whatever it
Yeah.
was?
Yeah.
So I
National.
like the idea that they've brought that audience, and I personally am a fan of it. I know you've got the whole Hollywood nonsense, and people use it almost as a stick to poke them with, which fair enough, do as you wish. But feel it necessary to just get it in there that I do like what they've done for the game.
Yeah, I think it's commendable. They've also done it, sort of in a way that's maybe not been seen before. You look at kind of the players they've brought in, notoriously being quite an experienced core group, and they've almost done that again this summer. But I think they have added that sort of younger dimension. Callum Doyle is a prime example of a player that has got probably a higher ceiling if they can get him into a team and he can learn off some of that experience that's in that group. Then you'd think over the course that would sort of hold them in good stead moving forwards. I think into more championship games, but it is going to be a slightly different one as well, maybe for the back two. You look at Kiefer Moore, you mentioned him. He's going to be a different physical presence to some of the other strikers they face. Haji Wright is a completely different player to Kiefer Moore, and you kind of look at some of the other strikers they face this season, Colby Bishop, all very different. I think that's going to be another intriguing element to this game. How Medic and Darlin operate against Kiefer Moore.
Yeah, I like to think, personally, I'm a lot more, from a defensive point of view, I'm a lot more scared of what Haji Wright has to offer, because it's pace and power. Kiefer Moore, he's someone I've always really liked, and I know there was that period of time when Norwich were very heavily linked with him, and dare I say, excited. I really wanted us to. I really, I do think Darling and Medic will be up for that challenge, but not that duel is not as important as who's in front of Darling and Medic. They have to be aware of what Moore will do, because if he's not trying to head the ball in from across, he's going to be knocking it down for someone. Who that player is, we'll obviously find out on Saturday. But Topic, McLean, they're going to have to be aware of who's around them. You can sort of see it, and it's the argument at the moment with Man United, with their back three, and they've got two midfielders who perhaps aren't the best equipped to play that system. And I'm not saying it's quite as dramatic with that, but that problem has made me very cautious of, we need whoever is in the middle, because I think it'll be Topic and McLean, for what it's worth, but they both need to be aware of what's behind them. And for all this talk of Topic and his guns, I hope we get to see that side of his game. It's going to be a tough challenge, and as we play whatever team we play in the championship, and as me and you sit and preview it, we will describe each week a different profile of striker or centre back, and Norwich are going to have that versatility in their arsenal to be able to deal with that challenge. But and famous last words, so clip me for this. I reckon Norwich have got what it takes to stand up to the challenge of Keith Moore.
Yeah, let's hope so. I think in terms of the XG conceded, Norwich and Wrexham are top the table. Wrexham top with 12.6, Norwich with 11. So I think famous last words, there should be a few goals in this one, but we'll see what we get on Saturday. Probably be a 0-0 draw, and we've jinxed that. But thanks for joining us for this show and this podcast. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. Of course, hit that subscribe button down below. We're on the road to 100, so if you could hit that subscribe button, we'd be much appreciated. Hit the like button if you enjoyed this, and comments always welcome and appreciated. We'll see you in the next one. Have a good week.